Hi. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Sonja, and it's actually been a while since I've given this a talk at a conference. And usually, what I would do is that I kind of write out my whole talk and then kind of perform that text back to the audience. But today, my speaker notes look like that, and it's going to be new for me. So I have a little favor to ask. If we notice that I get stuck, it would be nice if some of you could give me a little smile, and then maybe I smile back and we all feel better about the whole situation. All right, so my name is Sonja and I work at InnoQ, which is actually not a UX agency, it's a software architecture consultancy. And what we do is we give workshops, we do trainings, but we also develop a lot. And at the moment we're experimenting with getting into the initial stages of product development itself. So we've done some design sprints with our clients, and they've actually been received quite well. We're about 120 people, I think, all over the Republic. We have offices in Berlin, Munich, Düsseldorf. We're building one in Hamburg, which is very exciting. And apart from that, I think we do have 6 company events throughout the year. And they, well, I just came back from a 5-week-long vacation, and it's also quite nice that they let me leave for this long time. And I was horse riding in the Badlands of South Dakota, and I think after the 3rd day, I wasn't really sure if I'm ever going to come back, because my horse was called Ninja, and I think he got that name because he likes to jump over things. So I'm quite happy that I'm here. But apart from sitting on a horse, I've also learned something about the Native American culture, and one thing that kind of struck me was that I learned that the Plains Indians, they had developed a sign language, and it didn't matter if you're a Lakota, or if you're a Cheyenne, or if you're a Crow, everyone would understand the same signs. And for example, you have this sign, and it means Tatonka, which is the buffalo, right? And if you have a group of buffaloes, like there's many Tatonka. There's another word or another sign, it's called the sunrise, the sunset. This is the sign for wind. It's quite beautiful. And there are 2 other signs. This is take down the teepees and get the hell out of here. So and I have to laugh a little bit, because if I think about the times of colonization and, I don't know, some priests coming in and introducing Native Americans to Christianity, and it comes to the final blessing, it's like, you do amen, and everyone just gets up, packs up, and leaves, and you don't know what's wrong. But just as you're wondering what talk you're sitting in, this is actually about designer-developer interaction, and just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I kind of started out as an art director in a advertising agency. And I think one of my biggest clients was McDonald's, and I was there to go to the photo shootings and make sure that the peanuts on the McFlurry are in the right place, and that the swirl is swirly enough. That's a word. After that, I switched into a web design agency, and what I would do there is basically sit behind my screen and then create layouts for websites, web campaigns, banner ads, etc. And then I would, after weeks of work, I would take my pixel-perfect Photoshop file over to the development department and be like, hey, this is what we're going to do. We have this button here, and it's going to look exactly like this, and there's a menu here, and it's, I don't know what it's going to do when you click on it, but that's kind of your responsibility, right? And yeah, I think after a while, I was very frustrated with the advertising agency, or industry, and I quit my job, moved to London to study for a master in sustainable design. And if you want to put it this way, sustainable design is more about theories, how to save planet Earth. And it turns out that's also quite frustrating. And I finished my degree. I was pretty broke because London. So I moved to Berlin and found myself being a freelancer trying to survive. And I think it was at that point in time that I really noticed having my own ideas and creating like layouts and everything is cool, but I really have to be able to build my own things. And that's when I started learning to code. And it first started back home on my couch, and then I would go to learning groups and meetups, and I would meet nice people. And you know, if you're a designer, or if at least in the agency that I was working in, it was always you wanted to keep the ideas to yourself until the meeting, because if you talk about them beforehand, someone else might steal your ideas. And when I was hanging out in Berlin with my newfound developer friends, and I heard about open source, I thought everyone's kind of nuts. Talking about ideas and helping each other was something that I didn't really experience in my first job. Anyways, I found a first job as a front-end developer, and then 1.5 years ago, I was hired by InnoQ, and I think since then it kind of made sense, because I like to say that I build bridges, and it's between UX design but also front-end integration. So I don't only design buttons, but I also implement them and add them to component libraries and that sort of thing. And I think it's really, really important that we build these bridges between designers and developers, because at the end of the day, we're not sitting at home and building things for ourselves, but we're building things with other people for other people. These people are also, known as users, I guess. And if we don't figure out how to work together, we're always going to end up with things that may look cool, but they don't work. Or we end up with things that might work, but are ridiculous to use. And I think this is a pretty cool example of, I think it was, first I found it on a Reddit thread about who could design the worst volume control ever. And I think looking at this could actually be quite fun, but it's very, not very efficient, I guess. There's a nice quote that I'd like to share with you. It's called, "If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together." And I think for the purpose of this talk, I kind of edited a little bit, and I'm saying, if you want to go far, you kind of have to speak to each other. It's quite a revelation, isn't it? But if you remember the example that I gave you from the sign language, it's pretty difficult to understand each other sometimes, and especially when you work in interdisciplinary teams and you have people from all walks of life, different backgrounds, different perspectives and needs. It's pretty hard to have successful communication sometimes. And it's a broad topic, so I kind of try to get into a little bit more detail how you can communicate better with each other. And I'm going to tell you a little story that a colleague of mine told me, because it's interesting. He had a very different experience in one of his first jobs. He was a developer, and then his day-to-day would be something like this. Designer comes in, pixel-perfect layout in hand, and being, hey, this is what I came up with, and can you please implement this? Like this box has to move maybe 3 pixels down. And that's what it would always be like. A designer comes in, throws something over the fence, and he would sit there and sometimes do it. But he, at some point, I think he decided, maybe he got frustrated, I'm not sure. He decided to ask, why do you want to move that box 3 pixels down? And the designer said, I actually don't want to move that box down. I just want to align these two. And that doesn't seem like much of information, but it actually gives you so much more freedom to come up with your own creative solutions for the problem at hand. Because then you don't actually have to position everything with absolute positioning, but you can maybe use a CSS grid instead. So I'm saying you can, if you have the information of what the end goal is, you get away from following instructions, but you have, as I said, the creative freedom to solve the issue the way you want to solve it. And there's a another thing that I wanted to talk about, because I feel like sometimes I still get that. It's like designers paint stuff. It's like design is not about art, but it's more about psychology, and usually there are good reasons behind layout choices, font choices, color choices, and it's fair to ask a designer what his thoughts were behind a layout. And if you think about color, for example, I think even having a button, it kind of suggests what the action of the button is going to be. It's very simple. Anyway, so I think it's a duty of a designer to communicate these reasons to the developer, but it's also, I guess, a little bit of the duty of the developer to ask for these reasons. I wanted to chat a little bit about design tools versus development tools. So there's whenever I use a design tool, for example, Sketch, it's very static. So if I draw up a square and it has these dimensions, it's always going to have these dimensions. If I take the corner of the Sketch software or program and I drag it, it's like the square is not going to react. So it's different from web development tools. And also, the other thing that I don't know what happens when I click on a button. So I don't know if it has hover states. I don't know if it's going to jump somewhere. I don't know if the content or color is going to change. I don't know that when I click on it in Sketch. And sometimes, I forget to draw up all these different stages of a button. But there's another thing that I don't know when I work in Sketch. For example, if I have buttons like plus and minus, I don't know if they trigger a backend call of 2 seconds or not. I just don't know that. So if we don't sit together and talk about these things, I will not know if this is the right way to implement a button or not. Right, so I think one of the most important things that we can learn here is that a missing hover effect can be added afterwards, but if you don't respect the perspectives or the needs of a designer versus a developer, or both perspectives and needs, sorry, I lost my sentence, but the respect has to be there in the beginning. I guess the slide says it better than me. Right, so sometimes speaking to each other is not successful, and even though you sit together and you have a chat about whatever it is that you want, you still don't seem to find a common ground or see eye to eye. And I brought another example of buttons with me. This was on a project that I worked on, and we actually had some basic button styles in place. But then at one day, this new button came to the yard, and it looked the same, except for it didn't have rounded corners and some other minor adjustments, but they would all just take, very little time to implement or to do. And when I see that, I get like this instant anxiety, because someone who doesn't, know the codes, is not ever going to know how much time something needs. And I've been there, I looked for the border of a button for 2 days in one project, because that's sometimes how CSS works. If you have a couple of verticals that use style guides that override each other's styles of buttons. And in this case, I think we had the designer who was on the standpoint that we really need this vital change. We had a developer who said it's very too complex and it's not scope of the sprint. We had a second designer who said, let's just use the styles that we have already. And there was a PO who already approved of that button. So how do you get out of this button gate? Just do anything. Yeah, that's a joke, actually. But maybe the problem started a little bit further in the beginning, because you have to look at the team setup. I mean, how many designers do you have on a team? Do you have one designer and 8 developers? Do you have freelancers? Does everyone sit in the same room? How often do they meet? When are decisions made? Do the designer and developer meet first before approving something from the PO? And all of these things can be figured out, and then you kind of hopefully don't have the problems that you have in the end. And I know it's hard because I don't get much done when I rush from meeting to meeting, and if I have an all-hands meeting so that everyone is on the same page, I just don't have anything to show at the end of the day. And to get out of that, it's good to have principles and guidelines in place, so that every person on the projects know which role the other person has, and the common vision that you're trying to achieve. And there's a very good talk from Brad Frost. I think it's called "Let's Work Together." There's a couple of versions of that on the internet. But he looks at principles and guidelines in a hierarchical way, if you have an organization. So on the company level, principle and guidelines could be something like a mission statement or company values. Charity Water has a very powerful mission statement. You can read this while I drink some water. If every employee at the company knows that what Charity Water is doing, it's like that's something that you can bring into work and that you can work towards. On a department level, principles and guidelines could be something like brand guidelines, and that's a very static documentation of how you're supposed to use typography, colors, etc. So I think Ubuntu has a very good example of that online, and if you ever want to hold your designer accountable to providing good brand guidelines, you can tell them this is what I need. But it tells you, it tells you about the colors, etc., how to use them, when to use them, where to use them, in a very specific kind of way. If you look into teams, this is where design systems come in. And I think there are lots of explanations of what design systems are, but in addition to explaining which colors to use, which fonts to use, etc., which layouts, it also tells you a lot of things about navigation and interaction principles and patterns. So I guess there's a couple of companies who open source their design systems. I think this is from Material.io, from Google, I think. There's IBM, who has a Carbon design system, and Salesforce, the Lightning design system. If you want to know what good examples of that are, I encourage you to check those out. Right, so on a team level, I think it's fair to say that you should have a product plan in place so that everyone knows when a product is supposed to, or when the certain steps in a product are supposed to be finished, and the things that you have to kind of deliver at what time. And on the discipline level, we have, again, style guides, which is kind of practical information again, but it could also include code style guides or coding conventions and tools that you want to use in a team. So that if you come to work and you have a colleague who's using a different, software, you kind of, that's not a good setup. And I think we are people and we have opinions about things. And I don't know if this slide usually makes people very anxious again. But if we have principles and guidelines in place and they are all aligned throughout the whole hierarchy of an organization, I think that combined with the respect you have for your colleagues is a very good way to go. And this slide tells me that we're almost finished with our little adventure and that you're going to be the first ones out for lunch. But if you ask me what's the most important thing that I learned in the last 1.5 years, it's definitely how to pick your battles or when to pick your battles, because sometimes the damage that you do to a team through endless and heated discussions, it's not worth maybe the visual dissonance that you create or the code debt. Right, and last but not least, I would, I don't know, encourage you to, venture out of your silos and maybe look over the fence and try to learn something from different departments. There's a notion that designers should learn to code, but I think it goes the other way as well. So I think designers, developers need to learn basic layout conventions and which colors not to put on top of each other and stuff like that. And it's actually quite fun. And because I do both, I don't necessarily call myself a unicorn or anything like that. It's more, I sometimes call myself a computational designer, and sometimes I call myself a visual engineer. And it's a pretty good, nice spot to be in. And I hope you kind of are inspired to do the same, and then we can build cool things together in the future. Thanks.
Do you have questions? I have a microphone to ask them.
How many designers are here? Or who would say he's a designer? Developers? Yeah, well. Well, that's expected, I guess. Everyone's hungry.
Probably.
But we sponsor this track and we're outside there. So if you want to talk to me or to some of my software architecture colleagues, we're a very friendly bunch. And yeah, come by.